Hello, my name is Teresa Smith, and I'm the Vice President of Programs. And I am so excited to be here with Steve Kelley. Now, Steve Kelley, could you please tell us your job and what it is that you do?
Certainly, Teresa, I'm happy, and it's very good to see you. Thank you for this opportunity.
You.
So I am Steve Kelley. Thank you. And my role today is I am the Director of Downtown Real Estate and Development for the Downtown Investment Authority of the City of Jacksonville. And so the Downtown Investment Authority is better known really by its initials, DIA, and that is the arm or the organization within the city government that provides economic incentives for the development of businesses in the downtown area, which is both the North Bank and the South Bank of downtown Jacksonville. So whenever you see new developments and new programs that are trying to bring businesses into the downtown area, that's what the DIA does.
Wow, that sounds amazing. It actually also sounds fun and exciting as you're able to look at some of the businesses that we potentially want to bring to our area and have the opportunity to do those. So that's really nice. I love that. Were you always interested in this type of position? Like when you got out of high school, did you know
Mhm.
that you would see, or did you see yourself in this type of position that you're in now?
I'll be very honest with you, Teresa. When I got out of high school, I probably did not see myself in a role like this. I
Wow.
probably didn't have the confidence in myself that a role of this nature was in my future. And just through a long progression of continuing with school and taking on different roles within the banking industry, which I've been in really the majority of my professional career until I stepped over into this role recently. Other than that, I've had a deep interest in this type of activity ever since I moved to Jacksonville nearly 30 years ago. And I like to
Whoa.
tell this, yeah, so I like to tell the story that when I first started for work at Barnett Bank, I used to walk down Laura Street downtown past this old, beautiful but rundown building that had been boarded up for many years and past several other buildings of that type. And I used to always think, what a shame. And fast forward to today, and now I work in that building because it's been brought back to life. It's the St. James building, which is the city hall downtown where the mayor and all the city council and everybody is. That's where my office is. And it just gives me great joy to be part of that type of development activity because we've got some really big things going on downtown, and my role in the organization that I'm part of are integral to all of those efforts.
Wow, that sounds amazing. That is actually full circle for you to be able to
It
have
truly
passed
is. It
by the
truly
actual
is.
building, and you're thinking like, wow, what a waste. And we need to, be able to think of
Yeah.
something that we could do with the building. And now look at you in the position that you're in now. And that now
My
you're
my
able to
office
not only,
literally looks at my office literally looks at the sidewalk I used to walk down every single day
wow.
and look at this building, just go, what a shame. Jacksonville really has to get its act together and put some of these buildings back to productive use. And while we have a long way to go, we've really come a long way, and a lot of
Mhm.
people aren't aware of some of the big steps that have been taken over a long period. I've been here a long time now, 30 years. So there's been some wonderful steps, but we have a ways to go, and we know that, and we're working hard to make that happen.
Wow, that is nice. That is kudos to you for even walking the sidewalk and thinking about it. And for me, I feel like you were able to speak it into existence because now look at you. Now, I know you said that you've been
It's
here in Jacksonville for 30 years. Where were you
mhm.
before that?
Well, my home is in the panhandle of Florida. Fort Walton Beach is where I grew up, and I had the good fortune of growing up in an area with a lot of family, including my grandparents on my father's side, who had started a grocery business in the late 1950s, and it had grown quite a bit by the point I was in high school, so I had a place to work. And so from the
Wow.
time I was in high school and into college, I always had somewhere to work, which is, was very fortunate for me as a young guy, transitioning from my teenage years into adulthood. I always fortunately had somewhere to work, and I learned a lot by that. And certainly, seeing my grandfather and my uncle and my father all working in that business as entrepreneurial, endeavors. And in fact, my other grandfather owned a small hardware store just about 90 miles north of where I lived in a little city called Opp, Alabama. So both
Oh,
of my grandfathers and grandmothers were entrepreneurial. So both of my sets of grandparents owned small businesses. So I learned a lot about running small businesses at that time. So I was in Fort Walton Beach all the way up through nearly the age of, my late 20s, really, when
okay.
I moved over to Jacksonville.
Wow. Was that a hard decision to decide to move over to Jacksonville?
It really was for many reasons. Of course, whenever you leave family, that's always very, very tough. And I had, obviously, or maybe not so obviously, but I had, big friend circles because I'd been
Right.
there for so long. And you know how it is when you're from an area, everything's familiar, and you have a lot of history and memories just about everywhere you go. And so to uproot and leave that to do
Mhm.
something else, it was a big decision. And I had gone back to school and had
Okay.
just graduated with my master's, my MBA from the University of West Florida. So I really
Wow.
wanted to move to a bigger city where there were other opportunities. And that's really what brought me to Jacksonville, was just really the pursuit of other opportunities where I
Okay.
could use my recently completed education. And that's what led to my first role in the banking industry with Barnett Bank in 1991.
Wow. Now, when you moved to Jacksonville, did you already have the position at Barnett Bank, or were you just coming to Jacksonville to look for a position?
I came to Jacksonville looking for a position. I had a very
Really?
good friend. My best friend from high school was already living in Jacksonville and was working as an accountant. And so I had been over here a few times and had put some feelers out. So I had pretty good indication that it wasn't going to be tremendously challenging for me to find a job,
Hmm.
but I didn't have the job secured at that time. But I was able to get a job within about 3 months of coming to town. And
Wow.
it was, yeah, so it worked out very well for me.
That did. And then with your job at Barnett Bank, you were able to use some of the things that you had learned when you received your master's, for your master's in business administration. Were the things that were taught in your college classes, were you able to use some of those skills that you learned in your job at Barnett Bank?
Teresa, I was doing the exact same thing, except for I was getting paid for it, because
Wow.
when in college, a lot of time, you're working on case studies where you're given a problem set about a business and a challenge that they're going through. And so we would have to do a lot of analysis about their financial statements and their management structure and their reporting and all of that kind of thing. And so those case studies were very similar to the type of work I was doing in my very first job as a credit analyst, where I would, be looking at companies and their ability to repay debt. And so as they were taking out loans, we'd have to do credit write-ups, or credit memos, they're called, where we would do the exact same things I did in case studies in my graduate program at West Florida. So the transition was super easy. It couldn't have been easier. And honestly, it was because of I had been doing that work in graduate school that is why it was so easy for me to get a job pretty quickly, because the hiring managers knew that I had been doing that type of work in school, and said, come on over here. You'll be able to hit the street running, or hit the ground running. And sure enough, that was the start of my career.
Now that brings me to an interesting point that I would like to ask you. How do you feel about it? So when it comes to careers and your desire to go into a career, you as the employer, will you look for someone that just has more of education, or do you want to have someone that has more experience?
Well, I think obviously there's definitely a need and room for both. And so to the extent that, somebody is, all lopsided on one side or the other,
Right.
there are opportunities where that type of a skill set is beneficial. But in terms of the most well-rounded candidates, where they have a combination of education and experience,
Right.
I think that creates more opportunities for an individual where, being, I'll call it lopsided, one side or the other, might limit the number of opportunities that a person is best suited for. And so being well-rounded and both education and experience, so starting young, like I said, I had the good fortune of working literally from the age of 13 in a paid job.
Wow.
So I was earning a little bit of money and knew how to, manage my money a little bit, or had a little bit of spending money and things like that, and knew about job responsibilities and, being at work on time, how to interact with
Mhm.
customers, and, you know, everything that's associated with holding a job.
Mhm.
I had a long history of that, and in addition to the schooling that I had completed.
You went straight to college and just continued on until you received your master's?
Well, not all the way through. I went
Okay.
off to school. I went to the University of Southern Mississippi first. Here's a
Okay.
little tidbit you don't know about me. I actually went on a
Yes.
music scholarship, and so, but I
Wow.
never, I never really had an intention of being a professional musician, and it wasn't a full ride scholarship. It just kind of opened the door for me to go to Southern Miss with some of my high school music buddies, and so we all went over there, and we kind of went our separate ways over the years at Southern Miss. But I ended up a degree in marketing management, ties back into the grocery business, running a couple of stores with my father. And it was during that period that I recognized background didn't really provide all of what I needed to manage the finances of the family business that I was running at that point. So I really just wanted to go back to school to get some more accounting background and education. And so in the process of just literally taking some accounting classes, I ended up getting a second undergraduate degree in accounting, and I was the first person at the University of West Florida to walk across the stage twice at the same graduation, once for an
Wow.
undergraduate degree, and then I went and sat somewhere else and walked across. Those diplomas are right there.
Now that is something. That is definitely something. And that's good for students to know too, even though you may go to school on a music scholarship, on a sports scholarship, that does not
Mm-hmm.
dictate what your major is going to be or the career that you may actually follow. But it, like you said, it
That's
can
right.
definitely be used as a door opener, and you can take advantage of that to help you to obtain those goals that you're trying to reach. I know you're telling us that you're recently new into this position. So
That's
now
right.
that we're practicing social distancing, how has your job changed?
Well, certainly we're doing a lot more meetings like this one that we're having right now by way of Zoom. I think I've had 3 other Zoom meetings today, and over the course of the week, I'll probably have 3 to 5 Zoom meetings almost every single day, or doing a
Wow.
lot of business or communication by telephone. I really haven't seen anybody from my office face to face in more than 6 weeks now. I haven't seen any of the clients that I work with face to face in over 6 weeks now. I'm getting ready to put gas in my car for the first time in 6 weeks. So I really have been abiding by, trying to stay at home as much as possible, other than runs to the grocery store or
Right.
things like that. I've really, been sequestered here, working from home in isolation pretty much.
Yeah.
And so that's clearly the biggest change. And I think I'm also a professor for DeVry University, the Keller Graduate School of Management. So I've been teaching all along as well. And the campus has been shut down, so all of my classes are now online, not through Zoom, but through WebEx, which is virtually identical. And
Okay.
so, just working with students around all across the country, really, because we have online students mostly, some
Wow.
in Jacksonville, some from online, and learning about the challenges that they are facing, and working with students, mostly adult college students in their late 20s, early 30s, who are re-entering their college careers to move forward and advance in this very challenging environment has also been very interesting.
That is, and I bet it's, for some, it could even be challenging or intimidating. Um, what does your typical day look like? Is it Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and you're done? Or how is it?
One thing that I've noticed, and it's really no different for me, is that a lot of professional careers, like when I was in banking, or I have a number of friends that are either accountants or attorneys or things of that nature, or even in your office, I know a number of the people there. And because of the connectivity that we now have, either through being able to access email, remotely, or through our cell phones and smartphones, the idea of an 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 office
Right.
job, I think, is kind of long gone.
Right.
That there is an expectation, and in a sense, it's not all a bad thing. That
Right.
sometimes I might find myself answering an email at after dinner, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. Just a quick. I'm not really at the computer doing a lot of
Right.
work typically. And there might be the occasion where that's called upon. But none of that has really changed as a result of the pandemic, other than I'm doing it at this office instead of my office downtown as best possible. It requires a little bit more discipline on my
Mhm.
part to get started at the same time in the morning, when there's not an office with people in it waiting for me to walk through the door and everybody else to walk through the door. It's just
Yes.
that door right over there, and whether I walk through it or not, most people won't know. So having that discipline of getting started at pretty much the same time every morning, and work, maintaining work ethic through the day, and trying to wrap up, typically around 5 o'clock as well. As I typically, well, normally I work till about 6 or 6:30 to let traffic die down when I'm downtown, which I don't have to deal with traffic now. So that's been a wonderful change. Is that
Yes.
literally, so that probably saves me about an hour and a half each day, because it can be 30 to 45 minutes each way on my commute. So I have about an hour to an hour and a half of extra time every day, and plus lunch is about 15 feet that way. So I just go make a sandwich and take a quick break for lunch or whatever, eat some lunch, and then come right back to work. Where if I'm downtown or meeting with clients, it might be an hour to an hour and a half, or meeting with my favorite people from Junior Achievement or whomever it might be. And while I miss those interactions and all of that, there's no point for me to, go sit in my kitchen or living room for an hour or anything like
Right.
that. So in some senses, I can be more productive, because there's not much else to do than stay on top of my work and do what needs to be done.
Very true. And as you mentioned, sometimes too, we find ourselves working a little bit later, um, and waking up and working a little bit earlier too with it.
Yeah.
But all in all, when it comes to this social distancing, what are you hoping that our community, that we will learn from it, and what do you hope will change as a result of this social distancing?
Probably the main thing I would say is the value of relationships and the value of personal interactions that we now find ourselves not being able to have. And so, whenever you lose something, that's when you really miss it. I cut my thumb recently, and you never really realize how much you
Oh,
used something until you lose it, or how important it is to you until you
right.
lose it. And fortunately, just temporarily in this case, and as well as with this pandemic, it's just a temporary thing, and we'll be back to some level of normalcy each and more every day. But those personal interactions and relationships, and how important they are, and how valuable they are, and whether it's the people I work with in my office or other organizations that I work with, or the clients, and holding meetings face to face. Boy, there's just so much value to that. And
Right.
technically, yes, we can do pretty much the same work behind a computer screen apart from one another, but there's really just something about face to face interactions that's irreplaceable.
That is very, very true. And like you say, you just never miss it until it's gone. Never realize, the amount of time that we are able to spend with each other, how we just take it for granted. And now that we can't, just from simple
Yeah.
things, when you see someone and you're like, oh, I want to give you a hug, and you no longer can do that. It's just a
Oh, that's
hello.
right. That's right.
So, but as people are going through these times, I know some are struggling financially and some are trying to prepare to get themselves out. Do you have any kind of words of wisdom, especially when it comes to youth? Of course, they're not right now in this particular
Mhm.
position, but as they are looking to become adults and hoping to one day be able to take care of themselves, what kind of
Yeah.
advice financially do you have for our youth when it comes to preparing for times like these, even though we don't want to prepare,
Yeah.
but what should we do if it ever were to come again?
Well, one of the hardest things to do is when times are good and things are moving along relatively easily, and maybe we'll say normally, or what we might think is normally.
Right.
It's really hard in those circumstances to have the discipline to say, you know what, it's not always going to be like this. We tend to get in this mindset that, oh, the good times are going to just go, all those bad times are behind us, we won't have to go through that again. And history shows us that these cycles, regardless of what their cause might be, will come around on somewhat of a relatively frequent basis. And so, we had the recession in 2008 and 9 and 10. We had, horrible events like 9/11 to
Yes.
occur. And, so I can go back in history as an
Yes.
economics professor and tell you time after time after time, what ultimately had the same result, but from different causes. And so now here we are in a terribly horrific situation that no one saw coming, even as recently as Valentine's Day of this year.
Right.
I mean, so these things can happen very, very quickly and on a huge scale, like what we're experiencing right now. And for anybody to think that once we get past this, they'll never have to experiencing anything like this again, much less any other problems, hurricanes, whatever it is, that put people in very challenging situations. And so, that just really should should help us see the importance of, number one, getting into a situation where you have a stable employment, or you run a business that provides some level of stable income. And that there's a lot of things that people can and should do through from their high school education,
Right.
getting a job skill, even during the high school years, and building on that, whether they go to a trade school or some other school, or even get into a job where there's opportunities to progress and build stability. security is so important. So that's kind of the first step. And then the second step is to, once that income starts coming in, to budget it and to make sure that there's a savings being put into place, so that when these, not if, but when these challenging times come around, that the damage done within the household is minimized. It's like an insurance policy, except for you're insuring yourself. You're making that insurance policy for yourself and paying into it yourself for use by yourself and your family. And so, there's all of us want to protect ourselves and protect our families and to minimize any kind of harm that might come our ways. But for whatever reason, we often overlook the financial aspect of that and how important it is to prepare for these events, because we know they will cycle around, not terribly infrequently. So it's important to be ready for them when they come, and as very best possible, because the government cannot be the cure for all of our ills. They have to get their money from somewhere, and that comes from tax revenues or borrowing. And so, to the extent that there's not enough tax revenue coming in, like is the situation now, then the government has to borrow money, and that has its own detriments. But I'll save that economics lesson for another day.
As we prepare to close this amazing interview, I just want to ask you, do you have any advice that you will want to give our youth now? Something that they can start to think about, or even just an encouraging message you would like to share with them?
Well, Teresa, when I've taught junior achievement in the classroom, one of the things that I try to get students to do is to have this fictitious conversation with themselves from maybe 10 or 20 years into the future, and what that conversation might go like. So, if I was 18 years old and I'm talking to, the 30-year-old version of me, what do I want that 30-year-old version to say back to me? Like, gee, 18-year-old Steve, what the heck were you thinking? Taking on all this credit card debt. It's taken me all these years just to get out from under that burden. Why did you do that? So, at the end of the day, really what that little exercise does is, helps people recognize that the future will be here much faster than any of us ever think about when we're 15, 16, 18 years old. I mean, in a blink of an eye, you're in your mid-20s, you're 30, you're 40, or, life can go by so quickly. And so there's things that you can be doing at those young ages, 15, 16, 18, learning about the importance and really it's the secret to wealth of compound interest, and starting to save up even small amounts, $5, $20, $30 a month or anything, towards a future, really has an amazing impact by the time you're in your 30s and 40s, or much less all the time you get to retirement. So it's difficult when you're that young to think about things that far into the future. But wouldn't you want to have a conversation with the 30-year-old version of yourself and says, wow, you really had it going on when you were 16 or 18 years old. You started saving. Look at this great house we live in. Look at this money we have saved up. Look at, this bright future we have. All because when you were 16 or 18 years old, you paid attention and you started making good decisions then. Awesome. Good job.
Way to go. Definitely.
I know it's silly, but that's how I think.
No, it makes sense though, and it really is. And it's trying to really get the youth to understand, as you mentioned, it'll be here before you know it. We
so
always
quickly
try to put off tomorrow, put it off. And it's like, don't put off things for tomorrow that you actually can start and begin to do today.
Sometimes those bad decisions are difficult to reverse. And so, It's all about making one small good decision after another, one small good decision after another, and ultimately that builds a huge life of good decisions that really have that payoff, that
Right.
people look back at other people's, nice lives and everything and say, wow, I wish I had that. I don't know. I don't see that for myself. I don't know how that's going to happen. It's really just the result of one small good decision after another one, trying to minimize the bad decisions and get the best information. Just like a long walk or a long journey is just one step
Right.
at a time. And so, and eventually you open your eyes and you're there.
Right. And I love how you even mentioned when it comes to savings, whether it's just $5 or $10. Sometimes I believe we feel in order for you to save, you have to start with putting $500 away a month. And that might not be your reality. It might not be what you can afford, and it's okay. But as you
Yeah.
mentioned, the consistency of it, wherever you are and
Oh,
wherever you
yeah.
can start, just starting somewhere, and it will be able to grow as you continue. And then you'll be able to look back on your younger self and say, oh, I appreciate myself for doing this. And look where I am
Yeah.
now because I took the advice of what I was told. Yeah,
Well,
that is.
Teresa, I'm not too proud to say I started later than I should have, even as a young man. In my youth, working at a very young age, I didn't save as much as I should have, and I think about that from time to time especially when I'm teaching, finance and talking about compound interest, and I think, golly, and I wish I had, learned these lessons myself or paid attention to them. I'm sure I had, my grandfathers and grandmothers and mom and dad, trying to give me this information, and certainly through school as well. But I didn't pay attention to it as much as I had. So, probably starting in my mid 20s or late 20s, really when I started in banking was, by then I should have been much further ahead. So I had to kind of catch
Right.
up, and you're always catching up, and so it's never too early, and there is no amount that's too small to start into a savings plan for the, those needs down the way. That's security. That's, the safety net that when you can give that to yourself and not have to look for someone else to provide it for you, there's a peace and a comfort that comes to that, and a pride that comes that I protect my house. I, take care of my family. I'm not dependent on others for my needs. And, that's freedom, and that's peace, and that's, all those things that make it easier to enjoy life and move forward.
That is. Wow. Students, you just received some very valuable information, and you actually received the secrets to financial freedom. So, students, we really hope you enjoyed it. I have to say thank you to Mr. Steve Kelley. I absolutely enjoyed this interview. And boys and girls, if you do want more information about his shop, please go to www.janfl.org, and you're able to email us at info@janfl.org. Thank you again, Mr. Kelley. I truly enjoyed this time. Thank you for your commitment and also being dedicated to junior achievement and empowering our youth. We're hoping with this video that students, as you are preparing for the future, and it helps you so you don't have to worry so much about today, but you can look forward for tomorrow. Thank you, Mr. Kelley. Please continue to stay safe, and I'm looking forward to doing more with you.
Thank you so much, Teresa. It's always my pleasure. I love Junior Achievement and the work that it does with the youth around North Florida, and it's always my pleasure to contribute where I can. I appreciate you.